in collaboration with our friends at the channel, His Majesty's 10th Regiment of Foot. Find out more in the links in the description. By the end of 1780, the war is about to enter its 6th bloody year, and both sides are facing significant recruitment, supply, and morale issues. Commanders on both sides feel in perilous positions and write furiously to either Parliament or Congress, demanding more men and resources while complaining about increasingly hostile locals. In the south, and the most active theatre of the war, both armies lick their wounds and prepare for what will soon become the most decisive year of the war in 1781. Through 1780, the war in the north seemed to be at a standstill. Both sides had planned significant operations. The Franco-American coalition hoped to attack New York, while the British considered striking against the French expeditionary forces at Rhode Island, which, owed to its size and mobility, poses a serious threat to British forces across the Americas. But neither plans are realised, despite the bulk of both armies facing off against each other in the north. There is disagreement between Washington and his French counterpart, Count Rochambeau, over strategy, while the commander of British forces, General Clinton, had placed his faith in a conspiracy to capture West Point with the defector Benedict Arnold. Such a coup would have blocked future attacks against New York and made Washington's position in the region precarious. But the plot fails, and the deadlock resumes. Back in the south, by December 1780, Brigadier General Nathaniel Greene arrives at the Continental camp at Charlotte to finally relieve the disgraced Horatio Gates. Greene is a seasoned commander, having fought with Washington from Boston to Trenton. He was also familiar with his opponent, General Charles Cornwallis, who he had faced at Brandywine, Germantown, and Monmouth. Greene has brought with him other veteran officers, including the highly capable and popular General Daniel Morgan, who had distinguished himself at Quebec and Saratoga. But Greene faces a number of problems. On his way south, he'd received little to no support from state legislators, who claim they have no funds or resources to give. The army he inherits consists of just 1,400 men, many of which are still poorly equipped. To make matters worse, the army has just 3 days' supply of food, and with the Continental currency being almost worthless, fresh provisions are increasingly hard to come by. Greene is under orders to wear down the equally resource-strapped British army. This follows Washington's strategy at the dawn of 1781. Conduct a Fabian-style war of attrition while relying on a growing international coalition to force Britain to negotiate. Greene is not yet ready to face the British, who significantly outnumber his army, and he needs time and space to prepare his forces. In late December, just 2 weeks after taking command, Greene takes a bold and controversial decision. Without holding a war council and against classical military judgment, he decides to split his forces. Dividing an army when outnumbered is a huge risk. Greene hopes that by doing so, he can better support the irregulars fighting in the south, while threatening the rear of any British advance north. But this also leaves him vulnerable to be defeated in detail. In late December, Greene begins to move east to build his strength, while feinting an attack against Camden. Daniel Morgan, meanwhile, marches west with 600 Continentals and orders to threaten 96 and other British outposts. Further south, General Cornwallis faces an equally challenging situation. His instructions from Clinton are to pacify the southern states, while keeping General Greene at bay. At this point in the war, the British also hope to wear down their opponent and force Congress to the negotiating table. Both sides perhaps recognise that outright victory is unlikely, and what matters now is developing the strongest hand possible for inevitable peace talks. For the British and General Clinton, successful campaigns in 1781 could ensure that at least New York, Canada, and much of the South remain firmly within the Empire. Through his network of spies, Cornwallis is well aware of Greene's movements and the curious decision to split the Continental Army. Through reinforcements and loyalist recruitment, his army has now grown to almost 10,000 men. But the guerrilla fighting means that he cannot concentrate his army, and instead, he must commit Lord Rawdon and 5,000 troops to garrison a string of forts to fight the growing Patriot irregulars. His main army, meanwhile, of some 3,200 men, are to conduct offensive operations into North Carolina. This is important for Cornwallis, who believes that the guerrilla fighting in South Carolina could be dramatically reduced if the Continentals are pushed further north, thereby cutting critical supplies to the irregulars. A third force of 1,100 men under the aggressive and daring cavalry commander, Lieutenant Colonel Bannister Tarleton, is sent to reinforce 96 against a suspected attack by Morgan. In early January, Cornwallis breaks camp and slowly starts moving towards North Carolina and his hopeful confrontation with Greene. Morgan, upon hearing of Tarleton's position, begins moving north to avoid becoming trapped between the two British armies in the field. But Tarleton, under fresh orders to catch and destroy Morgan, is advancing quicker than expected. The British build rafts and bridges to cross a number of rivers in rapid succession and close the gap in a dramatic but exhausting 12-day pursuit. Finally, on the 16th of January, Tarleton's force catches up to Morgan before they are able to cross the now swollen Broad River. So as not to be caught crossing, Morgan camps at Hannah's Cowpens and prepares to make a stand. That evening, Morgan discusses his plan with senior officers. He is well aware of his opponent, Tarleton, and his usually aggressive tactics. He is also aware that the British have no respect for his militia, who have broken time and time again in battle. Morgan has 1,800 to 1,900 men under his command, mostly from the Carolinas and Virginia, including 170 dragoons, 450 Continentals and regulars, and roughly 1,300 militia. For many of the men, they cannot wait to fight the hated bloody Tarleton and his now infamous British Legion. That includes the young Continental cavalry commander, Colonel William Washington, who had been personally defeated by Tarleton twice the previous year and hungers for revenge. Despite their backs against the river, Morgan is confident in his position. He hopes the lack of an escape route will compel his men to fight hard for their very survival. Morgan is also making a shrewd strategic calculation. He knows Tarleton is hunting him and that Cornwallis is nearby, only 2 days' march away. By fighting today, he at least chooses the field with a well-rested and supplied army, a luxury he may not have if the retreat continues. Throughout the night, he walks the camp, encouraging his men and giving detailed instructions for the next day. Morgan also organizes a good breakfast and 24 rounds of ammunition per soldier. Cowpens is a perfect place for a battle, an open meadow with few trees and gently rolling hills. The ground, used for cattle grazing, is also devoid of undergrowth, making it ideal for cavalry movements. Further south, the 26-year-old Bannister Tarleton has been kept well informed of Morgan's position by local loyalists and Continental deserters. Desperate to catch up to Morgan, he marches his 1,100 men through the night. Tarleton believes that time is of the essence. If Morgan is allowed to cross the Broad River, he may escape completely. Although without sleep and having run out of food 2 days prior, his army is well motivated and trained. Tarleton has a crack force composed of 300 dragoons, 500 regulars, including an elite Highland regiment, and almost 300 provincials and militia. Almost half his army are loyalist colonials, including the dreaded and formidable British Legion. At 7 AM, green-jacketed Legion dragoons begin to slowly emerge from the tree lines. They are soon followed by fast-marching Scarlet infantrymen and Highlanders in their tartan kilts. To Tarleton's sheer delight and surprise, he can just about see the Continentals forming for battle. He knows he has his enemy trapped against the broad river and, without waiting to consult his senior officers or for his full force to arrive, Tarleton orders his army to deploy. In the gloom before daybreak, the British can see little of their enemy. A thin line of men on a ridge, lightly skirmishers, appear to mask a main force behind them. Tarleton, hungry for more information on the Continental positions, orders forward 50 Legion dragoons to drive off the skirmishers. As the dragoons charge forward on the centre and right, 150 Patriot riflemen from Georgia and the Carolinas start to take aim. Although militia, they have extensive frontier service and know how to handle cavalry. At 50 yards, they open a deadly accurate volley. The dragoons gallop on, but the riflemen do not break as expected and hide behind trees and other obstacles, while shooting down a number of horsemen, eventually forcing them back. As his American cavalry withdraw, unsuccessful in their mission, Tarleton considers his options. With the skirmishers unmoved, he still doesn't have a good view of the main enemy line. He could wait for sunrise and attempt to gather more information, but if the force in front of him is just a rearguard, the pause may give Morgan the time he needs to slip across the river and escape. Predictably, Tarleton makes the decision to attack. Well-drilled Legion and light infantry start the assault on the right, with drums beating and the men shouting battle cries. For most of the militia watching on, it is the first time seeing British regulars, with their customary precision, marching towards them with sharp uniforms and glinting bayonets. On both British flanks there are 50 dragoons, with several hundred more in reserve. As the British approach the skirmisher line, deadly rifle fire begins to take its toll, particularly among officers who are being targeted to reduce British command and control. The British for the most part hold their fire and use the threat of their bayonets to push back the riflemen, who slowly withdraw in good order to the line behind them. As the advance continues, a militia line of 1,300 men soon becomes fully visible, stationed at the bottom of the slope. Both commanders are with their men, Morgan moving between his militia cracking jokes, while Tarleton is in the front ranks shouting his men on. The fast-moving British line soon comes within 50 yards of the militia, who open fire. Losses, particularly among British officers, are horrific, with 2/3 of some companies becoming casualties. The British stubbornly continue to close another 15 yards before returning fire of their own. But the British tend to overshoot targets, a problem made worse when firing downhill, and the musket balls mostly fly over the militia's heads. Although their fire is ineffective, the bayonet charge that follows it is not. As the regulars surge forward, across the line, the militia gives way after firing once. Except on the left, where, just before the British light infantry are able to close, a second devastating volley is released, throwing the regulars back. But the militia eventually gives way nonetheless, and, despite the high casualties, the British can now sense victory and start to charge out of rank up the next hill in pursuit. To Tarleton, the collapse of the Continental militia signals a total rout, and dragoons are quickly dispatched to seal the day. But as the main British line reaches the crest of the hill, to their shock, a third line of infantry suddenly becomes visible. The Continental regulars, in their blue and white uniforms with bayonets gleaming, are formed up and waiting for them. More concerning still for the British, instead of dispersing in all directions as usual, the militia is pouring through gaps in the third line and reorganizing as if pre-planned. Stunned British officers, only moments earlier certain of victory, quickly scramble to hold and then reform their men. Without much delay, the now bruised British line is soon reorganised and at the Continentals, as both sides begin firing volleys. At the same time, 800 militiamen are catching their breath behind the safety of the fresh Continental line. As officers shout at their men to begin reforming, disaster strikes. British dragoons have broken through the Continental left and are now charging at full gallop over a small hill and directly into the militia. The attack comes out of nowhere, and within seconds, dragoons are slashing their way through the mass of panicked troops, who start to scatter. This is a disaster for Morgan. A rout behind his main line could quickly spread and end the battle in defeat. Further to the rear, commanding the Continental Cavalry, Colonel William Washington has been ordered to respond to both crisis and opportunity. Seeing the militia in flight, he has immediately moved forward to counterattack. Now it was the turn of the British to be caught off guard, as the white-coated Continental Dragoons waste no time in engaging their counterparts. A bloody melee ensues, but the British, outnumbered and disorganised, are quickly overwhelmed. Almost half the British Dragoons are soon cut down, while the rest retreat for their lives. Morgan too is able to stop the militia from routing, as he rides in front of them, waving his sword and crying out to rally. Disaster has been narrowly averted. On the main line, volleys are still being exchanged as the nerve of both armies is pushed to the limit. Officers are in the thick of the fighting, including Tarleton and soon Morgan, inspiring their men to fight on. To break the deadlock, Tarleton moves to envelop the Continental right. It is now the turn of his Highland reserves, and a new sound is added to the battlefield. Bagpipes open as the Scots advance on the left. To counter the new threat, the Continental right is ordered to wheel around and face their enemy. But in the confusion of battle, the orders are misunderstood. Instead, the Virginians start marching to the rear, followed by most of the Continental line. But it is not a rout, and cohesion is maintained. For the British infantry, exhausted but unbroken, seeing the back of their enemy gives them renewed confidence. Without orders, a spontaneous bayonet charge erupts across the line as men rush forward with cries of victory. But the Continental movements have been misunderstood. As the Highlanders get within 10 yards, the Continentals have turned and fire a devastating volley that kills or wounds almost half the regiment. A counter bayonet charge immediately follows, supported by Colonel Washington's cavalry, who charge the British flank. Breaking Highlanders is no mean feat, and the Scots desperately fight on. The melee is bloody, but increasingly isolated, and with the reformed militia now joining the fight against them, the unthinkable soon occurs, and the 71st Highlanders break. With the collapse of the left, the rest of the now exhausted British line can do no more, and whole units either begin surrendering on the spot or running for their lives. British artillery fire on, refusing to surrender, and true to their code of honour, they are all killed or wounded to the man, protecting their guns. Tarleton, not wanting to believe the battle lost, implores his Legion Dragoons, still in reserve, to counterattack. But seeing the writing on the wall, they uncharacteristically refuse his orders, turn about, and abruptly leave the field. Tarleton, not giving up, is able to rally other cavalry and soon charges in a desperate final gambit. Colonel Washington's cavalry soon meet them, and in the brief struggle, force them back. Amongst the chaos, Washington spots Tarleton riding away with several officers and immediately gallops straight after his nemesis. Tarleton turns, charges back to face him, and a swirling duel of horses and sabers begins. In the collision, Washington's sword is broken by a Legion officer, but he is saved first by his servant, who shoots the officer, and then by a friendly sergeant who blocks another blow. Tarleton himself next swings, but Washington parries with the hilt of his saber. In the desperate and furious melee, lasting just seconds, Tarleton draws a pistol and fires, missing Washington by inches. After lightly firing the last shot of the battle, Tarleton gallops away, fleeing south with his legion. In less than an hour, the battle was over, and Tarleton had lost almost 90% of his army, including over 300 killed and wounded, and 700 prisoners, compared to relatively light Continental casualties. Morgan had faced a deadly foe, and in stark contrast to the Battle of Camden, he had masterfully understood his enemy's confidence and aggression and used it against them. The evening before, Morgan had made it clear to his men that he intended to draw the British in and exhaust them over 3 lines of battle. Everyone therefore understood their role and knew not to panic when seeing friendly units retreating. Morgan had skillfully turned the inevitable withdrawal of the militia, as they had done time and again previously, to an integral part of his plan and bait for the British. Tarleton, perhaps the most hated man in the South, had been thoroughly outgeneraled. Although a brilliant cavalry captain, he had shown an inability to command larger forces, pushing his small army to breaking point before the battle had even started, and then failing to understand his enemy before attacking. 25 miles away, Cornwallis, learning of the defeat, swears revenge and readies his main army to march north in pursuit. But the damage to British control of the South will soon be felt, as support for the Patriot cause continues to grow. With all on the line, Cowpens is the first domino to fall in a year of increasingly decisive battles. Thank you for watching our series on the American Revolution, and of course, a huge thanks as well to our Patreon and YouTube supporters. Join now to get early access and vote on future videos. Thanks again, and until next time.